One of the things I wanted to touch on real quick is, and let's look at this. When I thought, just to revisit North Korea very briefly, if you look at this now, if you look at the location of North Korea, strategically speaking, here's Vladivostok, here's Russia right here. Here's the 100 kilometer, 90 some kilometer border with North Korea. But if you think about, let's say the U.S. was to get froggy and decide, okay, we're going to go at it with China. I think number one, all three of them realize, Russia and North Korea both realize, if China falls, we're next. China and North Korea both realize, if Russia falls, we're next. So in the event that that happened, let's hope and pray it doesn't, because none of us would survive. But in the event that that happened, which if you are a military planner such as Shoigu, et cetera, you have to have contingency plans for all of that stuff. The U.S. has all these bases in Japan, bases here facing Taiwan. They're building up North Korea, a strategically significant military spot where you would want to have Kinzhal missiles with a 1,700-kilometer range, which means you could hit everything in here, would be here. Now, certainly you could have them in Vladivostok, but then you could go in this direction. So the other part of it is, from the perspective of military planning, you have to do that. You got to hope and pray it doesn't happen. But Russia and China, who've been working together, have to do that. You have to look at that and say, if we get in this Tony Blinken crazy world where they're confronting us both and it turns military, then North Korea, number one, we all have to stick together or we're all gone. But number two, North Korea becomes a very, very critical part of any Pacific Rim, Pacific Edge defense. So it would make sense to really put your long distance attack abilities in North Korea. Anyway, your thoughts on that, Scott?
No, I understand. I understand your point. I also would point out, though, that both China and Russia have intermediate range systems. Not Russia so much now, but China intermediate range system. I guess Russia using a MiG-31 with a Kinzhal, it becomes an intermediate range system. They also have the ability to launch missiles from ships. So you don't need to get too close. I mean, one of the benefits, this as a fighter, reach. Give me that reach, baby. I'm gonna hold you back, and force you in, and then hit you. But I think they both have the reach. They don't need to put their assets all into North Korea. But the beauty of North Korea is, the stronger you make it, the more the United States has to reinforce South Korea, and that's a diversion of resources. It becomes a resource sump, where the United States is trapped into continuing to provide resources into South Korea. And if you take a look at that map again, South Korea is, basically surrounded by an arc of hostility. It's not good to be South Korea, and you see the panic in the South Korean president, during this meeting, because earlier this summer, Biden held his little trilateral summit with the South Korean president and the Japanese prime minister, and they came together to talk about how they can, come together about North Korea. We have a joint nuclear policy right now, and so the South Koreans like, if North Korea uses nuclear weapons, there will be a major response, a massive response from the United States and South Korea and Japan. And I'm like, did you look at North Korean nuclear policy, idiot? If they use nuclear weapons, they're going to be launching about 80 to 90 low-yield nuclear weapons that are going to saturate South Korea. There won't be a South Korea left, nor will there be a Japan. And then you have to ask yourself, is the United States willing to sacrifice Los Angeles, Seattle, San Francisco to defend the smoking ruins of South Korea? And you know who woke up real quick to this? The Japanese prime minister. He woke up to Kim Jong-un going to Russia, and he went, hey, Kim, baby. Yeah, forget all about the stuff I was telling Joe a while back. I'd like to meet with you without preconditions, anytime, any place. Let's talk. Call me. Because he's looking at this going, this changes everything. And Japan now is in a horrible position. So I think what we're looking at from a military standpoint is the United States is going to be compelled to, let's look at it from South Korea defines everything. It's involved in everything because it is such a resource sump. Our war plan there, I forget what the number is, 5007 or something like that. It requires us to send around 400 to 900,000 troops to the South Korean peninsula in case of war. Now, where are these troops coming from? So they've been earmarked. So we have a whole bunch of brigades throughout the United States that have been earmarked so that if the balloon goes up, these guys get on ships, they get on planes, and they start flowing to South Korea, the tip fiddle they call it, which is, basically it's a logistics plan, but you flow the troops, you flow the equipment. It takes a long time, it takes months. It doesn't happen overnight. There. Meanwhile, we are now committed to Europe, and there's competing requirements because Europe's saying, well, we need this many brigades. And some of the United States is going, you can't have that brigade because that's earmarked for South Korea. We can't give you that brigade. See, there used to be a time when the United States could fight 2.5 wars. We can't fight one war now. So if we're going to fight in Europe, that means we can't fight in South Korea. End of story. We can't fight anywhere else. But by strengthening North Korea, what Russia has done and China has done is locked America into the defense of South Korea. This is going to become a big priority, or else we lose face with the South Koreans and the Japanese. We've got to commit more aircraft, but every F-35 squadron that we send to the Pacific is one less F-35 squadron that can be sent to Europe. Now, this is probably a good thing because apparently if the F-35 takes off, we don't know where it's going to land. That's a
in the sea, from the looks of things, it's going to splash down in the sea. It's like somewhere. An amphibious plane, except the amphibious part doesn't work.
Yeah. So, but the point is, we just lack and this is amazing. Darling, we live in a country that spends almost $900 billion a year on defense. And yet we don't have the resources to fight more than one conflict. And even the conflict, we can't win a conflict. We can't win against Russia and Europe. That's acknowledged by everybody now. They don't say it out loud, but read between the lines. We can't win against China. We can't win against North Korea. We can't win against anybody. Even the Iranians. Remember back to the Trump administration when they shot down the Global Hawk. Trump was going to go in and hit Iranian air defenses, and people said, time out, boss. If you do that, there'll be a retaliation strike. They'll sink everything in the Fifth Fleet. They'll blow up oil. We'll be at war. And we won't be able to get enough troops in there for 6 to 8 months to have an impact. And even then, we may not win because they'll probably sink all our ships before they get there. This is the reality. For all the money we spend, we can't beat anybody, apparently. We couldn't beat a bunch of goat herders in Afghanistan. We didn't do too well against villagers in Iraq. We're not doing too well against people in Syria. We can't win anywhere. This is the reality.
Well, Scott, here's another claim. NATO claims it can deploy 3.5 million soldiers if attacked, in accordance with its new defense plans, can deploy 300,000 in the first month of a potential attack, while the total number of the alliance military personnel could reach 3.5 million. Chairman of NATO Military Committee, Admiral Rob Bauer, said, we're talking to NATO as a whole, if Finland and Sweden have joined, of about 3.5 million soldiers. So 300,000 is a number that we foresee at high readiness in the first 30 days. Man, Scott, I've often said this, use this term, alligator mouth. I mean, what is it? Alligator mouth and a Tweety bird ass. 3.5 million, man. I gotta get some of that. I gotta get some of that. Whatever he's smoking.
I'm gonna need more to find.
But 300,000 in the first month, Scott.
No. First of all, I'd really like to see General 300,000 coming from. Because NATO's right now they're doing an exercise, and again, Bauer, he's an amazing individual. He is an idiot savant because he clearly doesn't understand reality. They're doing an exercise, and he spoke about the exercise. He said, this is the most amazing exercise in the history of NATO. We are talking interoperability. We are working on joint logistics. We are working on joint communications. We're working on, joint operations. And I'm like, hey, Bauer, pro hint, we were doing that back in the 80s pretty damn well. We were a well-oiled machine. NATO actually functioned. We actually had the ability to put 500,000 troops online immediately because they were there. They were dedicated. We trained with them every day. 250,000 were Americans in Europe, in West Germany, ready to rock, ready to roll. But we stopped doing that because it was too expensive. Then we stopped doing anything. So what he's basically saying is NATO has to retrain itself to do all the things we used to be able to do. So even if he could magically snap his fingers and get 300,000 troops up, they aren't going to be able to communicate. They weren't going to be able. The logistics will be a disaster, an absolute disaster. They haven't, again, it used to be if we were going to go to war in the 80s, we had fuel depots all over the place so that when we deployed a brigade, we knew that we had enough diesel for these vehicles for a 6-month period or whatever the period of conflict was going to be. We knew where the fuel was going to come from. We knew how we were going to send it to an intermediate point, to a forward point. We had vehicles designed to do all this. They haven't bought the fuel for the 300,000 because NATO's budget is such that they don't do that anymore. So they do short-term acquisition. Where are you going to get the gas? Where are you going to get the gas? You don't know. Where are you going to get the ammunition? You don't know either. About the ATACMS, we're talking about ATACMS. Are they going to go to Ukraine? Well, the Department of Defense is saying, I don't think so. Why? Well, remember South Korea? One of the key aspects of the American defense plan in South Korea is to use a system like ATACMS to take down the North Korean artillery systems that are going to overwhelm us in day one of the combat. To do that, we need to fire a whole bunch of ATACMS. Well, we don't have that many ATACMS left. We're in the middle of refurbishing some ATACMS, but we have about 1,000, a little more than 1,000 that are available. If we start hunting like 200-300 to Ukraine, we don't have anything left to fight with. And we're not producing enough new ones. And now we're talking about a potential conflict with Russia, where we need 300,000 troops, because these 300,000 troops better be backed up with the best tanks, best equipment money can buy. Well, wait a minute. Didn't we just have to go to museums to pull out Leopard tanks to refurbish and send to Ukraine, and they don't work? The Ukrainians are sending them back, even though new Leopards that they sent don't work. NATO doesn't function at all. Zero functionality. You can play paper games all you want. You can have command post exercises all you want where you fake everything on the computer. But when it comes time to push comes to shove, boots on the ground, get things growing, we can't do it. 300,000 is a pipe dream. Doesn't exist, will never exist. NATO will never again be able to generate 300,000 troops in a 30-day period. End of story. 3.5, again.
Yeah, they can make a lot of money. Whatever they're smoking, if they can put that on the market, they'll be. It must be mushrooms. That ain't that.
Mushrooms might be it. I'm taking the wrong substance.
Okay. One of the things that we've heard, we're getting towards the end, but we want to touch on this. One of the things that we've heard is that recently, Vladimir Putin has been meeting with generals, and he's, we've been hearing again, and this has been going on for a long time. You and I have been talking about it. Lately, we're hearing the possibility of a major Russian offensive. Now, I've said for months, if time is a good weapon, I use time. If I'm Russia, people are like, they're going to make a big offensive. They may. I'm not saying they're not going to. But if I'm them, everything is going right for them by kind of chilling out and allowing your enemy, as the Iranians say, thank God for making my enemies fools, right? As they sit, Blinken is doing stupid stuff. He's running off his mouth. They're pissing off everybody in the world. The BRICS is growing. We just had the G77 plus meeting in Cuba. Half the world was there saying, screw this. We're tired of the U.S. screwing over us. I'm not going to say that the Russians aren't going to do a big offensive. They may. They don't have to. And it's getting closer to winter. And from what I hear, Germany's saying, well, we don't have the money to subsidize fuel for our population like we did last year. We don't know what's going to happen. What's happening on the battlefield? Do you think there's a big offensive coming?
Well, like you, I've committed to the what I believe is a sound assessment that says that Russia will destroy Ukraine's combat effectiveness by the end of summer. It's like tomorrow, and and early fall, which will promote that out to the end of October. Um, I think that's happening as we speak. I mean, Vladimir Putin alluded to the fact that Ukraine, just in the past 3 months, has suffered 71,000 casualties. Now, that doesn't mean dead, but it means irretrievable casualties. Casualties are gone. And when the number of troops trained by NATO in support of this counteroffensive was 60 to 90,000, somewhere in between there. If you've lost 71,000, you've pretty much lost it all. There's not anything left that's viable. It means that in order to continue this, Ukraine has to be drawing upon reserves that come from other resources. And unless there's some massive mobilization taking place beyond pounding people on the head, sending them to a facility, pistol whipping them until they sign papers, tell me how motivated that guy is going to be to die for his country. Ukraine's exhausted itself. And I think there's a growing recognition that this is the case. Now, that doesn't mean that individual units lose combat effectiveness. There will be units there that can fight. But the problem is, if you're holding ground or doing, doing what you're doing in front of you, but the unit on your left and your right aren't, and then the Russians identify that and are able to push through and penetrate. That's the end. That's how this ends. And I believe that Russia is getting to that point. I believe Russia has ground down Ukrainian capabilities such that they will be in a position to push and create gaps and advance and through fire and maneuver put Ukrainian units that have retained combat capacity in an untenable situation where they will either be compelled to fight and die where they stand or withdraw to a more defensible position. And military logic says that they'll probably withdraw. And I believe that this withdrawal would be of such a nature that they would have to concede the eastern bank of the Dnieper River and fall back behind that. I still believe that that's the direction that's happening. The exact timetable for this, who knows? Because in order for Russia to go in the offensive, understand this, that Russia will take losses. Offensive action is expensive in terms of lives. The other thing that I don't think, I saw this, but I can't say everybody saw it, and I still don't know what it's going to be like. But I just was confident that the world is going to stop supporting Ukraine. That as Ukraine loses on the battlefield, the enthusiasm of the world to support, the ability of the world to support will diminish, and we're starting to see Ukraine's friends just drop off. What's happening with Poland is amazing. When you have the Polish president talking about Ukraine as a drowning victim, and the last thing you want to do is get close to a drowning victim because they're going to bring you down, so we're going to back off. That says something, because remember, just a month ago, we were all talking about, well, the Poles and the Ukrainians are going to come together in an economic, military, political union, uniting Western Ukraine with Poland and all this kind of stuff. Now the Polish president's saying, we don't want to have anything to do with Ukraine.
Doesn't Poland have an election upcoming?
Yeah, they do, and I think
that may have something
the,
to do. And the Czechoslovakia, they're having these gigantic rallies and protests in the streets in Czechoslovakia, and they're saying, "Hey, the prices are going up." Isn't it funny how all of the ideological things, the Russians are evil, blah blah blah, and when it comes down to it, what pisses people off? I need to buy some bread and eggs. I got kids. I got a dog. I got to buy dog food. I got all this stuff. When it comes down to it, people look at their wallet and look at the grocery shelves, and that's what'll put them in the streets.
Yep, look, it's happening. And if there's a cold winter this year, it's going to be far worse. 80,000 Germans marched in Magdeburg the other day in an anti-Ukraine war rally. It was suppressed. The German government actually said the media can't cover it. 80,000. That's a respectable number. So the anti-Ukraine sentiment is just ballooning, and I think it'll gain momentum. And here's the thing now. Now I put myself in the Russian shoes. I'm Vladimir Putin, and I'm looking at this. I think the last thing Russia wants to do is freeze this conflict, either through
Absolutely. No way that's
negotiations.
happening. No way
Right.
that's happening. You're
But
winning. Everything's
but
working for
right.
you. Why would you freeze it?
I agree, and that's why this notion that when the muddy season comes, both sides are going to buy. I think the Russians are going to continue the pressure. When it becomes cold, they're going to continue the pressure even more if it does that. But the Russians also have to look at and say, um, the pressure doesn't need to be exclusively on the battlefield, that we can achieve this collapse through a combination of economic, political, and military means, which means they may, do a rebalancing, so to speak. Because again, at the end of the day, when you say 71,000 Ukrainian casualties, we're like, holy cow, that's just unbelievable number. Putin has said that the best case for Russia is that they're losing 10. The Ukrainians are losing 10 guys for every one Russian. That's best case. That means that the real number is probably around 7 or 8 to 1. That's still an overwhelming kill ratio for Russia. But if it's 71,000, that means Russia at a minimum has lost 7,100 guys, many of whom are dead, most of whom are probably dead. That's a huge number. That's a lot of Russian mothers who lost a son. That's a lot of Russian wives who lost a husband. It's a lot of Russian kids that no longer have a father. And my read of Vladimir Putin is that he cares about Russia. He cares about the Russian people. He cares about these families. So he's not going to needlessly throw lives away when, just by simply maintaining pressure. Look, at the Ukrainians are going to continue to throw lives away. Why not let them do that as long as possible? And then when the time comes, you apply the pressure. But I just don't see the big arrows that everybody's talking. I just see pressure until collapse. And then the Ukrainians will pull back and the situation suddenly changes. But I do think that we have to pay attention to the evolving diplomatic crisis that Ukraine is finding itself in. Because at the end of the day, this conflict will be one, it's political. It's going to be a political decision made by Russia on how to bring it out and into this conflict. And I think that, Russia may find that the political calculus is being altered as we speak, as people walk away from Ukraine, and that the necessity to put the pedal to the metal militarily and accelerate this collapse might not exist anymore. So if you had asked me, a month and a half ago, what I thought about, the collapse and the military victory, I would have said 80% certainty that Ukraine will collapse militarily by the end of summer, early fall. I am now readjusting that and saying that it's about a 50-50, not because Ukraine's getting stronger. That's not the case. It's because Russia's redoing the calculations and saying that we don't need to put so much emphasis on the military when things are happening politically and economically that are achieving the same result without the loss of lives.